Greetings and welcome to Cosmere U. I'm Zaladrith and I'll be your instructor for today. Today's class is The Dawnshards Set Out. Spoiler warning, everything in the Cosmere is at risk of being spoiled without exception, including unwritten and upcoming books. This may sound dramatic, but I am deadly serious that this lecture is not just a theory. It is an explanation of the steps needed to understand the past and future of the Cosmere. After the release of Wind and Truth at the end of 2024, we had all the clues we needed to deduce these secrets, but it has taken us over a year and a half to even conceive Brandon Sanderson's challenge, starting with solving the Shattering of Adalnalcium. If you're inspired by puzzles and want to test your wits and innovate on your own solution, accidentally watching this video may lose you the chance to solve the fate of the Cosmere for yourself. Now don't listen to wit, just because you didn't do it first doesn't mean it doesn't have value. So if you want to leave the lecture hall, this is your final warning. But for the doubtful or those who just want to know, here are the spoilers we will cover. We'll start with my cycle theory that started it all, then the true names of each Dawnshard command, the exact ordering of the shard cycle, how to read the shard cycle, where the concepts of math, magic like focus and intent come from, the origin of the 4 spiritual attributes, the rules of how shards are cleaved, the names of the 14 untold shards, proofs from books and systems of equations, and lastly we'll cover what the diagram is. Our journey begins with the 4 Dawnshard commands. Only change and exist are confirmed canon. Adalnalcium's Shattering was described as a circular mural in Dawnshard, and I hypothesized that it was a 4-command cyclical process describing creation. After the Shattering, these 16 shards would logically continue as a 16-step cycle of creation, still with each leading to the next. To begin my 4-command cycle, I started off with placeholder commands Motivate and Define, combined with Change and Exist, and this made a compelling cycle, so I added that to the quadrant theory. I sorted the shards into quadrants based on the Dawnshard commands and also tried to keep each quadrant as 2 synonym or antonym pairs. The results were quite compelling, but incomplete. I then added on the theory of allomantic quadrants, firmly grounding each Dawnshard into the 3 realms plus temporal. Special shout out to Redditor Halcyon Knights, who pointed out that the Cosmere outline was completed only for Mistborn release, so ideas like push-pull, pairing, quadrants, tables, and the cosmic importance of 16 were probably fresh in Brandon Sanderson's mind. We also know that one Dawnshard is not like the others, so change associating with the 4th pseudo-realm of time sounded very familiar. It's similar to how time interacts oddly with the 3 spatial dimensions in relativistic physics. As you approach the speed of light, time slows down. Weird stuff happens. Then, when I was relating physics back to the cycle hypothesis, I remembered that in relational quantum mechanics and philosophy, things cannot exist in isolation. They only exist in relation to something else. A simple example of this is the concept of color. A plant is not intrinsically green. It is made of a material that just happens to reflect green better than other colors in the human visible spectrum. But light is a concept that only people with receptors in their eyes can understand. It's not a universal truth. You'll more often hear people talking about Schrodinger's cat or the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, but suffice to say that these are real concepts covered by relational quantum mechanics. Before something can exist, we must be able to relate or connect to it. So let's replace motivate with connect. This means that exist must be last. Connecting or relating to the thing comes second to last. Defining probably comes first, so change must be second. Another theory that came up a lot in my research was the idea that every shard in a primary commands quadrant had a secondary command that influenced its meaning. I like the new theory a lot, since if Adalnalcium was pulled apart by the Dawnshards like magnets, it makes sense that they would do the same for each subquadrant. And while not entirely correct, this was another big step taking me closer to the solution. At this stage, you wouldn't normally be able to solve for the Dawnshard commands, but let's try to calculate them now anyway. I'll just say that the command must contain all of the following meanings: think, create, start, beget. Plus, it must be immediately categorizable as cognitive in order to fit the quadrant. And it relates to ideas. Can you think of a verb matching all of these meanings? Feel free to pause now if you want to try. The first command's true name is conceive. While you can conceive or think of an idea like a concept, you can also conceive or beget a child. It is the beginning, a start of a new beginning, and it relates to concepts. Next, let's move on to connect. Similar to the other, from future rules, we'll know that connect's true name must have the meanings of relate, activate, start, and engage. So pause here if you want to guess, but its true name is inspire. Things cannot begin unless they are inspired, and inspiring creates causation. Before we can explain the rules of how to use these commands, let's first correct the order of the 16 shards. I'd been iterating on my shards in a text document, but when I realized it in a diagram like the one before you, it looked kind of like this. And I was immediately shocked. So pause now if you want to figure it out for yourself. Did you notice something interesting? Preservation is at 16, odium at 9, ruin at 8. Swapping honor and valor was trivial to put honor at 10. There are 16 allomantic metals on Scadrial, 10 surge bindings for the 10 orders of Knights Radiant for honor, 9 orders of fused, each with a single surge binding. 8 pure allomantic metals fit ruin, or 8 pairs. And sure, you can argue the numbers aren't guaranteed to matter, but there are actually words of Brandon for both sides of this, and the numbers worked extremely well with all of my existing rules. And most is supportive of this theory. Brandon has mentioned that if different shards had been on different planets, they would have influenced the world to multiples of specific numbers, some more strictly than others. Honor must be exactly 10, but preservation and ruin would settle for multiples of 4, which matches our diagram exactly. Just like reason at 1 and virtuosity at 3. While researching other significant numbers in the Cosmere, I recently watched a video by Jason and Seth of the Cosmere Academy about the Iriali. It's hypothesized that the 1 is reason, splintering themselves into the Iriali people. Virtuosity has 2 Hyon lines, and their magic system seems to involve the number 2, but cyan, magenta, and yellow are the 3 secondary additive colors of light. Since it's theorized that the yellow Hyon line went to the Iriali people far later than the Shattering, I put virtuosity at 3. And I suspect autonomy might be guiding them, but I digress. Speaking of autonomy, on Haldane, Sand Mastery has 7 Sandmaster ranks with 7 sashes and 7 colors of coinage. But don't forget that on Dark Side there are 7 colors of star-carved star mark tattoos, which don't work on Day Side. Plus, the cloud on the moon pulses exactly once every 7 days. 7 plus 7 is 14. Splitting their magic system of 14 into 2 independent sets of 7 sounds exactly like something autonomy would do. And speaking of 7, there's 7 dots in the translated glyph for Lifelight, Korra Vari's Light, who took up the Shard of Cultivation. Now this awakening has 10 heightenings, 5 visions, and 5 scholars for endowment. 10 is a multiple of 5. And I had to do a 3-way swap within a quadrant here, but the numbers lined up with its existing categorizations almost perfectly. With these magic numbers of power, we've calculated the exact positions of 9 of the 16 shards, with only 3 shards misplaced due to missing rules. The first of these missing rules is how to read the shard cycle. The way that I had been maintaining the initial cycle hypothesis was by reading them out in order as one leading to the next. Most of the time this worked perfectly, but every now and then there'd be a weird one, so I knew something was missing. Then I started including the subsequent shard as well, which seemed like a crazy system for Brandon Sanderson to create, but the meanings actually started working better. But it didn't fix the problem with the weird one still, so can you spot the pattern and the solution? Pretty much every weird statement involves change. It's so simple. Basically, the subcommand change always negates, even if it has to reverse the cycle of time to do it. But even with our new formula with subtraction, there are still some weird statements. I've tried different rules and words, different visualizations, and as soon as I made this next one, the Sanderlanche began. Pause now if you want to figure out the subcommand revelation for yourself, but do you see the difference in their placement? It's not that every shard has a subcommand on the shard, every shard is adjacent to 2 commands, as if the circle had been cut. Adolnalcium wasn't pulled apart, he was cut apart, and conceive cut first. This realization struck me like a physical blow. This also made it clear why Dominion should be in slot 13 instead of Mercy at 15, since it changes to autonomy as you proceed forward. Only 2 misplaced shards or a single swap remains. I have a pretty good guess at the rules for reading the shard cycle, but of course it's impossible to know the exact phrasing. So pause here if you want to guess for yourself. But what I came to was using both adjacent shards and subcommands. Invention is manifested by virtuosity, conceiving endowment. I'm also including here one of the more interesting lines out of the shard relations you'll see. Cultivation is inspired by ambition manifesting ruin. At first this one didn't make sense to me, so I tried other rules, but cultivation is deliberate pruning or modification in order to grow something as your ambition wills it. Change works very similarly to before, just with more words and less math. Next, we're going to reverse engineer the cuts used to shatter Adolnalcium. So we know the 16 shards that resulted from the shattering. Conceive cut Adolnalcium into 4 quadrants first in 2 cuts, which is most likely known. So I'll save you a bunch of work and just tell you it was exactly 8 cuts. I tried some crazy theories with different orderings of 14 cuts, but therein lies madness. So if you want to solve the 8 cuts for yourself, which took me days and days of iteration, you can pause here. Wish you the best of luck, but otherwise, here we go. So since we have 4 Dawnshard quadrants, we know that Conceive cuts twice. Each quadrant will be a shard that relates to one of the 4 realms. So pause now if you want to guess them, but they are the 4 spiritual attributes. Now it's simple logic to try adding them together to get their parents. 2 halves that form a full circle. So pause if you want to guess, but I got focus and intent. A focus is comprised of investiture keyed to your identity, like an infused gemstone on Roshar or a keyed metal mind on Scadrial. But while we're here, why don't we also guess at the whole shard that was cut? So my guess is command. Did you say magic, everything, all of creation? Commands are a word or phrase used to focus intent. It's ironic that 4 commands were used to cut command itself. Anyway, this gives us our first hints to the shard cleave rule. Cool, we've guessed the origin of magic and the first 6 untold shards, but we don't yet know why. To do that, we need to solve the hardest round with the last 8 untold shards to reverse engineer the shard cleave rule. Luckily, we already have the first untold shard, Retribution. It took days for me failing validation and gradual sharpening on all of my shard cleave and shard cycle rules before I finally discovered I had Mercy and Devotion swapped. So I'll give you that last positional swap for free. Now, let's solve for placeholder names for each shard in the round of 8. First, I assigned some variable names we can use to solve the system of equations. For now, let's just use simple addition to describe the relationships when a shard is cleaved. Then, we'll guess at some placeholder names to make these equations have more meaning, and feel free to pause at any time if you want to solve for yourself, but trust me, don't worry about the final names until we at least have placeholders for everything and learn the real rules. So here's a reasonable set that we can start with, but feel free to use your own. Now, let's apply some more systems of equations. Here's the shard cleave rule applied to their parents, the 4 spiritual attributes, which are labeled around the outside of the quadrants. But don't forget our shard cycle rules too. Let's take a look at chivalry, for instance, since it's closest to the known shard Retribution. This will help us determine if its meaning is semantically correct enough, or if we want to update it. Every shard is a system of 6 equations now, and basically we can just keep iterating on the weakest ones, tweak names, till we get closer and closer to the truth. The first pattern has to do with child pairs. Which pairs of the 16 shards stand out to you as being different from the rest? Think about it for a second. But they are the ones related to our old friend Change. Every Change pair is a pair of opposites, while the rest are more similar. But what is the difference between the pairs in the round of 16? Change uses negation, but what axis do we cleave the other pairs over? The answer is intentionality. The first child is always less intentional. The second child always most intentional. But this doesn't work for Change, of course. Can you figure out the exception rule? It's simply reversing the least and most intentionality. So this fixes a lot of our problems, but it also makes our originally chosen words feel weaker. So all we can do is iterate and refine. And here's some additional rules I discovered along the way. Shards must relate to their quadrant's command and realm, and shards cleave in pairs that sound good together. So from here, you can iterate and refine on your own, and just improve the weakest word every time. So pause if you want to try it, but my near final results after much iteration are presented here. These words have meanings close enough to the final words that all the proofs still work, so let's run the proofs. Providence matches the gravity of investiture way better than vigilance, has a more religious feel to it. Also, it has a second meaning of prudence, which is both survival and thinking. Sanctuary also has that religious feel, and is definitely the least intentional form. Most sanctuaries are kind of just left alone to naturally protect, instead of being fully managed. The range of exist covers leave it alone protection to maximal intention protection. Salvation is the most forgiving, retribution is the least forgiving. Feelings of vengeance are usually instinctual when something happens, but you have to be very, very intentional about fighting your instincts in order to forgive someone. Now, fate is one of the most extremes of fortune and the hardest to change. It also relates to karmic retribution. Accident seems like a kind of weird opposite for fate, so I thought hard about using chance or fortuity here, but for reasons you'll understand in future lectures, accident is a stronger word despite sounding less fancy than the others. Plus, it pairs well with fate. Innovation. Accidents are conceived by innovation conceiving fate. Happy accidents to discover new things. And last but not least, our final untold shard, as you may have guessed, is wit. This one speaks for itself, literally. Yes, this means that Hoid is wit. Let's add on some additional proof here. The epilogue of every book always includes wit's name. Innovation is the combination of both originality and novelty, so here wit is telling us that wit values innovation before change. I guess he's given us a freebie. And I'm a little less certain of these names, but providence, meaning prudence, is just a little too perfect to pass up as it's next to the cognitive quadrant. So here, not cognitive, not physical, God, or the temporal realm, you can only look inside your own spirit. Salvation is in the spiritual quadrant of inspire. So I was using chance for a long time, but I read this in the epilogue. When virtuosity meets an unplanned catastrophe, the only word I can think of meaning both unplanned catastrophe and chance is accident. And looking up accident and fate, the two actually make a pretty strong pairing and go well together. So now that we've covered everything, it's time to finally reveal what the diagram is. What is that Madden scribbling? You see, everything in this video is the diagram. The diagram is not foresight. It is finding patterns in books to calculate the future almost deterministically, other than other changes. What Tyrangian solved in a day of brilliance, it took our community 1.5 years. But by building on the back of quadrant and subcommand theory, I discovered the diagram in 1.5 weeks. But how far can we take it into the future? I believe it can take us all the way to the end of the Cosmere. However, the diagram appears to be organized in the format of the Bible, literally. The millstone is the oath stone. These little ones are the shin. Unfortunately, I haven't had time to map the other diagram quotes to the Bible, so this quote here is probably the only other one with an exact chapter and verse number. So this is where you come in. Join the diagram. Conceive explanations for the diagram mapping to the Bible. Let's make some changes, get more concise with our shard cycle rule, shard cleaving rule, and the respective change rules. Get inspired. There's many more secrets out there. Let us set our sights on the diagram in pursuit of our dreams. The world has truly entered a great fantasy era. See you all at Dragonsteel Nexus 2026. This has been your instructor, Zeladrith. That's all for today's lesson. Class dismissed.